I drew a zombie printer on my iPad. And that printer I drew in order to make myself some stickers, and that sticker ended up turning into a 3D printed zombie printer. Fast forward to a few years later, and I have now made my own one where I sculpted it myself. That's because this one was sculpted by Genesis, who is part of the C27 Collectibles Patreon. We are in the future now, and I have sculpted my own one, which is a 3D printer that I designed after that. And this was a sketch that I had drawn up, which I ended up sculpting myself into being the zombie printer that I always wanted to go right next to my other one. But since my name is your dad, we do things a little bit differently over here. And so a printer on a shelf by itself is not good enough. I made an entire diorama. In fact, the diorama on its own is also not enough, so I'm going to tell you what I'm about to do with this diorama. Not only does this diorama have a fully working desk lamp, but also a working LED backlight. It's also going to host an ESP32, which is going to drive some addressable LEDs, which are also going to be lighting up the little monster that is made by the resin, as well as these little spotlights in the front, which can be addressed all individually. That is not all. This is a extension lead which plugs with actual true working plugs on the back of the entire model. Let's just stop dilly-dallying and get straight into making this model. Okay, that was a small little lie. We are going to dilly-dally a little bit more because I do need to tell you that this video was not sponsored by anyone other than Groundeffected. And yes, the file will be available. You can get this file. You can buy it on the link in the description, or you can just become a Patreon. So I've obviously printed everything already, because if you're going to make a model, you need to have stuff printed. Now, I've printed certain stuff in clear resin, for example, the little monster, and I have broken off some things. That is because I'm not a very good sculptor yet, and I'm learning how to make things not too thin. But if yours break off, it doesn't look too bad. I also printed the little drip that goes onto the table in clear resin as well, because I want to tint these so that they have a nice tint to them. All the little bottles of resin that go on the table, the little spatula, the books, everything is printed. All of this, by the way, is printed in Sunlu resin. If you want to get Sunlu resin because it's cheaper and I use it, then please buy it from the link in my description, because it is actually an affiliate link, and this does give a little bit of money back to the studio, meaning that I can help keep the lights blind in my eyeballs. So the LEDs that I have set up, I've already wired up a bunch of stuff. These are just cob LEDs. I will try and leave a link in the description. There's going to be a lot of links in this description, and how I'm going to power all of this is probably just using this power bank, which is essentially delivering 5-volt, but that is basically just a USB, so I could plug it into the computer, but I don't want this model sitting right next to my computer. Maybe I do, maybe it sits there, but that's getting a little bit ahead of my schedule. This is an ESP32 board. This is essentially a little brain. It's a computer chip thing that has Wi-Fi on it, which means you can write programs and read them through this thing and write it to this thing and make your own little I can't do that. So the only reason I'm using this is because these LEDs, not these ones, these are normal LEDs which you just power and they light up. Those ones are RGB, but they are also individual addressable. The words are really hard. Individually addressable LEDs, which means that the ones that are inside of there, it can all be addressed individually and be told to be a different color or do a different function, like flash or blink or whatever the hell the thing is that I need to make it do. And there is a strong possibility that I may be using this later on in the project, but I'm not going to say anything about that until we get to it, because maybe I don't, and then you're going to hold me to that. My first port of call is going to be getting all the electronics set up on this bottom part of the base, and that is because I want to be able to get this done so that all the wiring is done before I start painting. Now, I don't expect everybody who's going to make this to be making these, and if you are going to make it workable, there's not really much I can help you with this. I will include all the files for making the working plugs and everything, but you're going to have to do the rest of that on your own, because I don't know if these pieces are actually easily findable online. So that's the thing about it. I literally just made the little plugs and stuff out of stuff that I found in my own little electronic box, and if you can't find the exact same things, they may not fit in, which might cause problems, and I don't want to cause problems, but I will include the file and you can decide if you want to use it or not. Also, this does mean that there is going to have to be modifications because, like I said, it wasn't designed to have a fully pluggable plug at the back, so that wasn't part of the plan in the beginning. It is part of the plan now, and so I just dremeled out a little hole in order to fit the rest of the back end of the plug, because yes, it's not really an extension lead, but when it's on the base, it is fully going to look like it is one. These LEDs that I'm soldering onto these very tiny little wires are essentially individually addressable LEDs. They start with a W in their name. There are these weird little LEDs that you can address with an information wire, and essentially it has all the colors and you can tell it to do things on the board. And so I've soldered that up, and I've also wired everything with probably the wrong gauges of wires, but I don't really care. There's only 5 volts going through this entire build, and I'm going to draw that power from a little power bank, and that's essentially going to power the ESP32 board. But before that, I need to make sure all the wires are tucked away and glued in place. I'm also going to quickly spray some of this violet ink onto the clear parts, as well as a fluorescent pink over the top to just give it a little bit of a highlight, or why not. And once that's fully dried, I'm going to hit those with a clear lacquer spray. This is a very cheap one from down the road, but a couple of layers, about 3 or 4 of this, let it dry, 3 or 4, let it dry, and you get a pretty good result. What you will notice though is that it's a little bit milky on the inside of the monster. That is because of the resin. So to fix that, I poured a little bit of machine oil inside and sloshed it all around and then dried it off, and that's pretty much the result of fixing that. Hopefully that helps you. I'm going to be gluing with solder. It's not glue, it's just solder. All the wires that go to the ESP32, which is power, ground, and then an information which goes to the IO16 on this board, because that's the in-out pin. So amongst this mess, I have finally got what I decided to set out doing, and that was to get the primer layers down on everything, as well as to sort out all of the electronics. And so far I've done that. The only thing is, electronics and me is a very sticky subject. This is because there is something wrong inside my head, and I'm pretty sure it's going undiagnosed for my entire life, and this means that I rarely get stuck on where to put things. But I have come up with a plan for this one. Now obviously the original plan was not necessarily to add all of these computer things inside, but it has happened, and so my next steps is going to be to make just a little square thing that this can mount to on the inside, so it looks neat and tidy, because wires everywhere drives me completely nuts. And as you can see, I've hidden very nicely the wires from the front ones, and so we will deal with this, which is why I made the plug in the first place. And how I'm going to do this is by using this program called Tinkercad. Tinkercad is I don't know how to explain it. It's a computer thing on the computer that you go in on the internet, and you don't have to download anything. You just sign in, make an account or whatever, and you can manipulate 3D shapes to make some pretty simple and some quite complex parts on this thing. I used this program to build my treads for my tanks, and it works really well. And as you can see, I can send that straight to the Bamboo Labs and print that in a black PLA carbon to glue that in place, which is now the brace or board or whatever you want to call it for my ESP32. Electronic people, please look away while I super glue this electronic board into place. That is not the way you do it, but don't worry, it's underneath. We'll never know because no one ever saw that, right? Now on this little monster, I wanted to paint his eyes because I wanted them to stand out, so I painted them with deck tan. I then also went very carefully around the edges of the eyes with some Magos purple, just to try and get the crevasses around the eyes a little bit deeper and darker. I then took a little bit of spray into the bottom of them, which is a grey Griff Charger, whatever it is. It's a contrast paint that I sprayed into the bottom of the eyes, and that was a very bad idea, and I came back and fixed that later, but I'm not going to really go over that because it was a very sore point and it made me mad. I had to end up layering it, and I just don't even want to talk about it. But the base was easy. The base, I dry brushed this with a little bit of grey. Once I was done with that grey, I then came back with Drakenhof Nightshade and sprayed that into the shadows, because that makes it have color and it's not boring. I also dry brushed a little bit of brown onto that step because for some reason I decided to sculpt a piece of wood on the step, and that's very annoying. But I dry brushed that and also gave that a Reichland Flesh Shade spray through my airbrush because it's a very good way of doing this. taking that same brown, I'm going to use that to pretty much dry brush the whole back sign thing. I don't even know what to call these things, and I made them myself, but that backboard thing needs a dry brush with multiple different browns in order to create some depth and bring out the lovely textures that I spent hours using the crease tool to sculpt into this wood. So if you're gonna paint this, make sure you bring out those freaking pieces of wood, because I spent a very long time doing it. Also, I want to talk quickly about the LEDs. These are called cob LEDs, and these are in the light that's on the table, as well as the backboard light logo thing. And you may not want to do this part, but if you do, I just put them in. It's just positive and negative that goes out there, 5-volt power, and I used a piece of white paper on the inside as a diffuser so that the light was distributed and shone all across the letters. If you are clever enough, you should be able to put your own thing in the background of that, and I will try to see if I can include the files for a blank one so that you can do that yourself. Otherwise, yes. Getting back to the painting, I used some techniques that I had freaking learned when painting a Ninja Turtle one time on these little lamps, and I may have overweathered them, and yes, I probably did actually overweather them, but it was fun to do it, and I want to practice things while I'm painting. This isn't important. This is something I'm just painting for myself. I sculpted this thing, I made this thing, so as I go along, you will see that I add certain things to it that just weren't even part of it before. There was no plan at all. I used some decals. I made these myself. I literally just bought off Amazon some water slide decal paper. There should be a link for most of these things in the description, so if you want any of them, just scroll through and see if you can find them. The lenses on those little lamps, spont lamps in the front of the base, have been printed in clear. I also gave them a gloss clear coat to make them nice and shiny, and then I went to my favorite metallic paints, which is from Ammo by Mig. For some reason, they just seem to flow so well. Annoyingly, the frickin' names come off of them, so I can never tell you what the names are in most of the cases. But I painted the springs on the desk lamp, as well as some edge highlighting around all sorts of areas on the desk lamp. Now for the table, I wanted this to stand out a little bit more, and I did also sculpt some really awesome wood grain in this, and I really didn't want to waste the 2 evenings that I spent doing that wood grain on painting it terribly. So I used a dry brush which will bring out all of the texture, and then I used an ink which is, I'm pretty sure was a sepia ink, to give it a brown color. And then I came back again with a dry brushing of deck tan, and then using skeleton horde, I sprayed that over the top. The skeleton horde is a little bit more yellowy, but in the shadows it goes dark brown. And because it filled up all the crevasses, look at the lovely wood. Oh my goodness. You can still come back and do some more dry brushing over the top of that, but I was pretty happy with it. I did some edge highlighting and called it done. On the base, I also eventually ended up adding this little spatula, because if you're 3D printing, there's going to be a spatula. And also, since there was a blob monster, I figured there might as well be some of the resin on the spatula. And so to make that work, I used the Posca pen to make the drops on the base, and then I used the purple to paint over the top of that. For the books, I gave everything a black primer layer and a zenithal, which is white over the top of black. And once that had dried, it was just a matter of taking a bunch of different contrast paints to paint over the top of them. And the reason for picking contrast paints is because of their transparency. Not all of them, and also some of them are terrible if you want to paint a flat surface, but I also painted the inside book page cover thing, the pages, not the covers, the pages. I painted them with white because paper is white, I think. I'm gonna spray these later though, so after I've done all of the different colors on the books, I'm gonna take Reikland Flesh Shade and I'm gonna spray that pretty much over the shadows and across some of the pages as well, because this is gonna help make the shadows in the pages look like they are shadows. Because it's a very small thing, obviously you need to create some depth by creating some contrast. On some of the books, I sculpted a little bit of detail, and for those details, I just used the edge of my brush to very carefully pick them out with white and black as well. I then went over the edges just to create a lovely edge highlight, because I really like a crisp edge highlight. When I draw my own drawings, I use white highlights around the edges of things and inside of things to create some contrast, and also to kind of move your attention to places that I want you to look at. And I use those same techniques when I paint miniatures as well as models, statues, whatever it is. I use these techniques to draw your eye in to areas that I want you to look at. And speaking of areas I want you to look at, a very important area on this model is actually the 3D printer that's sitting on the table. Realistically, the entire reason that this model exists is because of this 3D printer. And I feel like at the end of all of this, once I had done painting everything, the 3D printer seemed like it wasn't the most important thing anymore. So the paint job for this 3D printer needs to be beyond ridiculous. And I think I'm going to start by doing a human flesh tone colored tongue for his mouth, because that's just weird, and that's definitely going to stand out and draw your eye to the 3D printer, which is going to be sitting in the background. Now obviously I'm going to give this a clear coat with some gloss a little bit later. I'm not really sure if I remember filming any of that, but the top part of this is where I started to think I was going to make a mistake. And before we even get near that, I need to also paint this bottle, but I also need to explain about the bottle why there is a little bit of tape. That is because the bottle is clear. It's printed in transparent resin. This video feels honestly like crack. I don't know why it's so crazy. Who edited this video? Anyway, speaking of painting the bottle, I painted the lids with black. This was just because I thought that lids needed to be... I honestly had no idea what to do with these lids. I dry brushed them a little bit with the grey. I also painted this purple color, which is like a, I don't know, a pink. It's not even purple. I don't believe this is purple. Vallejo, speak to your eyes, because this is not purple, it's pink or magenta. But never mind that. I then sprayed that label with blue because I, again, have no idea what I'm doing, and I opened this all up to reveal that nice transparent straw that's coming out of it, and there was also some resin inside of it, so I painted that resin and I highlighted the edge of that straw to make it stand out. You better look at that when I do the hero shots in the end, because I personally like that bottle a lot. Now, getting back to the top of this printer, I used fluorescent pink because I'm crazy like that. And I also gave that a little bit of a low light shadow, and on top of that I put little spots to make it match with the other printer. But also at this time I realized that because of all of this, I wanted to hide where the plug and battery source and everything was, so I 3D printed an extra little piece. Yes, I truly believe this entire video was made on crack. This is the craziest video I think I've ever made. Honestly, at this point, is there any point in even videoing the voiceover? Because I don't even know what's going on anymore. If you can make out what's going on, then freaking well done to you. I'm gonna paint some teeth at this point, probably paint the base, I think. I don't even know. It's blue. Yes, that's the color I painted the base. I didn't know what to do with these colors, by the way. All the way through making this model, I felt like I don't know what's going on, and all the way up until I got to the 3D printer, and then I really had no idea what's going on, and I really should have drawn at least a color sketch, but I did not do that. Something is in fact wrong with me. But the worms, easy. Paint them like skin tone. The blobs coming out the sides, easy. Deck tan, a little bit of Magos purple, a little bit of purple over the top. There's a little screen in the front of the printer. It'd be cool to print this thing like super huge and put an actual screen there, but that would also be crazy. Maybe print like the top in transparent, put like the real stuff. Dude, I have so many ideas in my head, because now that the sculpting has opened it up, there is so many things I can do, and whilst doing this I regret so many things, but I also wish I did other things, and I also wanted to do more things. Speaking of more things, I decided that I wanted to make a freaking speaker to go next to this thing as well, and so we're gonna cut to the footage of me making that speaker. So originally the design was made so that I could put the old 3D printer next to the new 3D printer. Well, actually it was just so I could make a place to put the 3D printer, but I think I've made a new idea, and I want to put the speaker in because there is a song that everybody knows about, and I want that to sit there in a little boom box so we can play that song out of my diorama. Now, I'm not gonna lie, it is Wednesday, 17th of July, 12 o'clock in the midday. This means that the video needs to be edited and made and everything needs to be done. I have no time. Oh my god. So, very quickly, even though it's super late, I'm gonna friggin' try and measure up this speaker. It's a speaker. And I'm gonna jump into Nomad Sculpt on my iPad and slap together the most rudimentary looking speaker thing I can possibly do. This thing is a DF mini player, which is essentially a MP3 player. You put a little SD card in there, power into one side, a speaker in the other, and you can add a switch, or just by shorting out things, essentially, you can just get it to start. All that's left to do now is to put that speaker inside of this horribly terrible looking thing that I made, wrap up some of the components so they don't short on each other, and solder a little plug onto the end so I can plug it into the bottom of the base and call the model done.
Some plastic, more models to paint, more shelf space to take up, and if one falls off in place, it won't matter.
Hopefully you enjoyed something a little bit different. Normally it is a man in spandex getting painted, but this time it is something out of my own brain, my own head. I made this thing, I did that. But if you like it, then I would honestly please ask you to check out the description, because in that description there will be a link for where you can buy this model. Don't forget that if you also want to support me on Patreon, you will get the printer in the middle tier, and in the higher tier you'll get the entire lot. It's a very confusing situation. If you're confused about it, I'm sorry, join the lower tier and just message me or something. Actually, there's too many of you. Don't message me, because it'll get out of hand and then you're going to be sad that I don't get back to you. I'm waffling way too much. Thank you to my patrons, by the way, because without them, my eyes would not be blinded and I wouldn't have the time to make things like this, as ridiculous as it is. And also, thank you to everybody that watches my videos. And if you did not like what you saw, if you did not enjoy the crack video, then I don't care. You should just kindly talk.